The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television. Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Many thanks to Kyle Kalinsky for this clip, where Jimmy Carter brilliantly explains how the establishment gave us Trump.
How do you both explain the rise of authoritarianism? Where's this coming from?
She said, how do you explain the rise of authoritarianism? And she's saying Trump really is authoritarianism. And I'm not sure that's fair, but we'll talk about it in a minute.
Well, I think the root of it is something that I haven't heard discussed much. I told a group today that in 1999, at the end of the last millennium, in the beginning of 2000, I was asked to make speeches in Oslo, Norway, and also in Taiwan. And my subject was, what is the greatest challenge to be faced by the next century? And I said the disparity between rich people and poor people. And I think that is the case not only between people who live in a country, but also between nations. And I believe that the root of a downturn in human rights preceded 2016. It began earlier than that. And I think the reason was the disparity in income, which has been translated into the average person, good, decent, hardworking, middle-class people feeling that they are getting cheated by the government and by...
So he's talking about hard-working, middle-class people, and people perceived him that way, more as a populist. And I'm old enough to remember, I voted for him, and I remember perceiving him as a peanut farmer from Georgia. I felt like he was a regular guy, not a condescending, Harvard-educated elitist.
Society, and they don't get the same element of health care. They don't get the same quality education. They don't get the same political rights, particularly after the stupid decision of the Supreme Court on Citizens United, where they said that it's an unlimited amount of money going into campaigns. But now they feel that even in politics, their choice of a candidate to be president or governor or congressman or whoever is not the same as a rich person's. And also, once that candidate gets in office, if it's successful, quite often the average person feels that they are repaying their contributions with legal bribery, and it's legal. And the justice system has also gone down. Long before we had this last election, when I left the White House, for instance, 1 out of 1,000 people were in prison. Now, 7 people out of 1,000 are in prison. 7 times as many people who are Americans are now in prison as they were just when I left the White House. So the feeling of an average person that I'll be treated fairly by the justice system is missing. So, basic human rights, income, status in society, health care, education, participation in politics, justice, the things in which we used to have complete faith now have been distorted by the rich people getting richer and the poor people getting poorer. And when the rich people get a candidate in office, they can be sure that the tax laws and everything else are going to keep them getting richer and richer, but the average person suffers. So I think that dissatisfaction with the existing system of politics resulted in the outcome of the election in 2016 in the United States. People were willing just to take a chance and to abandon democracy and what we know about is basic principles and try something new, no matter what it was.
So there you go. Whatever it was. There's just no better way to explain it. Income inequality is why we have Trump. That's it. Now, I made that crack about Harvard. I was educated in a place like Harvard, even though it's the West Coast version. Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, is a lot like Harvard in the kind of education it provides and the kind of attitudes, perhaps, that people can learn there. And I have to say, a lot of my fellow Witties are very compassionate when it comes to poor people. And a lot of Harvard grads are very compassionate when it comes to poor people. But there's an angle, there's a way of looking at life that makes someone like Elizabeth Warren appealing because she has merit. She has a plan for that. She has a good resume. She's done the things that people who go to Harvard and Whitman do to get ahead in life. We earned it, damn it. And we're really smart, damn it. And on and on. But that puts us out of touch. If we're not careful, it puts us out of touch with the kinds of people who love Bernie Sanders. Because the demographics of Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg are clearly different than the demographics for Bernie and for Donald Trump. And so Jimmy Carter here is being fair to Donald Trump by saying that the reason people gave him a chance, let's give it a whirl, is because of the desperation. And the people who are more comfortable, and we've been picking on them since the Bernie or Bust show started, the people who are more comfortable don't feel the desperation that led to Donald Trump. So they're just willing to call the people who support him a basket of deplorables and leave it at that. No further thought necessary. Let's just knee-jerk and say that everybody who could vote for Donald Trump is less than. And that's a dehumanizing thing that we talked about in the comments video yesterday, that it's too easy to put people in a category of other and then discount them. And calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorables is dehumanizing. And it isn't fair. And it's not going to help our country. And it's not going to help our world if we look at life like that. I got a comment from HM who asked me to please discuss Bernie or Trump. It's not a vote out of spite. We just hate the rest of Dem candidates very much. And that sounds bad on the face of it. We hate the Democrat candidates. But I think what any Trump supporter would hate the most about Democratic candidates is their condescension. And condescension is dehumanizing. It's ugly. And I would not blame someone if they felt hatred towards someone else who had a sneering, snarling, condescending attitude. And we've talked about that attitude. Mimi Rocha is a great example of a sneering, snarling Democrat. She drips with condescension. And Hillary Clinton drips with condescension. And when you look at that attitude, it's not difficult to understand why HM here feels hatred. And then my answer was, if the mainline Democrat voters hate Trump as much as they say they do, they will pay attention in the end, one way or another. Supporters such as yourself, who will either vote for Bernie running as a Democrat if he receives the nomination, versus voting directly for the Republican in the general election if he doesn't, are doubling their bite at the apple. The margin of victory should be close nationally, and even closer in the battleground states. They ignored you last time, and all signs point to your leverage being even greater this time. You can't underplay the double bite at the apple. Staying home is one thing, but voting directly for the opponent doubles your power, doubles your leverage. And that's what Bernie or Trumpers are doing this time, probably even more than last time. And last time, it's clear if you look at Victor Tiffany's video on climate2020.us, if you look at that first video, it's clear that the Bernie or Trumpers alone, without any other help, denied Hillary the White House. So this comment, it's not a huge segment of the population, but ignore it at your peril. Now, the problems that Jimmy Carter is discussing of income inequality and how people feel about the system as it now stands is really easy to see in South America, Central America. You may wonder why I'm jumping here to the IMF, but if you think about it, think about what Jimmy Carter just said, and then think about how the IMF has been operating and still apparently is operating. Meet the new IMF, same as the old IMF. and we're going to be in Ecuador here. Ecuador has erupted in protests over its new IMF program, revealing just how little progress the fund has made. The International Money Fund has changed. Gone are the days when it would use its lending powers to strong-arm countries into adopting a slate of free market reforms that put the interests of investors before those of the people, or so it claims. The IMF truly has progressed since the heyday of the Washington Consensus in the 1990s. Combating inequality has been incorporated into its mandate and is now one of its own criteria for success, at least nominally. Capital controls, previously frowned upon by many mainstream economists as an impediment to globalization, are now recognized as a potentially useful tool for developing countries, and concerted, if inconsistent, efforts have been made to reduce the burden of conditions attached to IMF loans. These are real improvements, and commendations are due to those inside and outside the organization who fought for them, but beneath these much publicized reforms, the fundamental structure of the IMF's approach remains. Going on about the improved IMF, I had to find the rest of the story. The other one petered out on me. This is the source of the first story, Michael Galant, December 4th, 2019, and these two paragraphs are what I already read. And this one I think I did too. These are real improvements, and commendations are due to those inside and outside the organization who fought for them, but beneath these much publicized reforms, the fundamental structure of the IMF's approach remains the same. Today, as before, the organization privileges the interests of businesses and investors over the needs of the people it purports to help. Nowhere is this clearer than in Ecuador, where President Lenin Moreno's implementation of a $4.2 billion IMF loan agreement sparked a wave of mass protests led by a coalition of students, workers, and indigenous groups. Moreno came to power in 2017 after the left-leaning former President Rafael Correa's occasionally deficient but generally successful decade in office. From 2006 to 2016, per capita GDP growth rates more than doubled on average, and inequality fell considerably. The percentage of people living in extreme poverty, defined as those earning roughly $48 per month or less in today's dollars, was cut almost by half, in part due to significant increases in social spending on health, education, and housing. Jimmy Carter would be impressed with this. Much of these gains were enabled by an extractive development model and windfall from high international oil prices, but when those prices plummeted in 2014, Correa's administration weathered the storm better than many other oil-exporting countries, in some measure due to Ecuador's intentional default on $3.2 billion of historical debt that Correa criticized as illegitimate. After winning an election campaign during which he promised to continue Correa's policies, Moreno unexpectedly broke from his predecessor and shifted the country sharply rightward. The IMF agreement, signed in March, solidified this shift and reveals how little the IMF has really changed. First and foremost, the agreement is a classic austerity package, mandating dramatic cuts in public spending on the order of 6% of GDP over 3 years. Jimmy Carter didn't talk about austerity packages, but they apply to the United States as well. And this is why we have problems with unions. We have the Chicago teachers strike. We have wildcat strikes in red states. Teachers are striking without their union leadership. We have this unrest all over the world and all over this country that comes from imposed austerity, where the rich people are saying, we need to tighten our belts so that they can have even more of our productivity. Mark Weisbrot, co-director of the Washington-based Center for Economic and Policy Research, estimates that this budget tightening will entail firing tens of thousands of public sector employees, raising taxes that fall disproportionately on poor people, and making cuts to public investment. This in turn will lead to higher unemployment, an increase in poverty, and an economic downturn that will be longer and deeper than even the IMF's own projected recession. the country's current unrest was sparked by one piece of this austerity program, a sudden and significant cut to fuel subsidies. So if you look around the world, what often throws the match onto the tinder is a fuel tax or a transportation tax, something where bus rates go up or a fuel subsidy is removed, something like that. But the bigger problem is that the rich are getting richer, obscenely richer, and the poor we're balancing the wealth of the rich on the backs of the poor people. And that's what Jimmy Carter was talking about. And that's what Bernie or Bust is all about. Because if you could vote for Elizabeth Warren, she's not even a cheap imitation of Bernie. If you could vote for Biden, you're voting to continue to crush poor people. And if you have a good education and you're down with that, then I have a problem with you. I might even call you an asshole, and I've been criticized for that. But if the shoe fits, I'd say you need to wear it, because the poor people that suffer all over the world aren't going to get relief without our help, without more highly educated, more affluent people. We are all in this together. And if you think you're a liberal, and that means your heart bleeds for those who are oppressed, you've got another thing coming. That isn't compassion. That isn't empathy. What I realized in editing this episode is that it's getting really long. And so what I would like to do here is end it and urge you to go on to the episode on Phil Ochs that follows. So the Bernie or Bust show will be divided in half today, and I hope to catch you on the flip side. The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.